Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to continue our lecture series on World War One, and today we're going to be talking about the home front. So, what's going on at home domestically in the United States? Now, I didn't realize that my shirt was going to match the backdrop here. I apologize for that. That's very distracting, but I'm not going to change. So, get over it. The home front. So, what's going on? Well, World War One is a total war, right? It's a war of attrition. First site to run out of stuff loses. So producing stuff, it becomes important. And so, that makes it a total war. It means all of society, the totality of society is going to be needed to be able to defeat the Germans. So at home, everybody's going to have a role to play, and we're going to kind of talk about that today. So everybody is affected by the war. If you're a man, you're expected to either A, go fight if you're of fighting age. If you're not of fighting age, then you're going to be expected to be working in factories, making guns, bullets, boots, or producing food for the soldiers. We now have to supply the bullets, the guns, and the food, not just for us, but for Great Britain and France as well. And so that's going to be a daunting task. And one of the things that we're going to totally overcome, largely with the help of women and African Americans, it's going to change the role of women and African Americans in society. It's going to change their perceptions of themselves. Women will start to move away from the cult of domesticity, which we've talked about in previous lectures. And African Americans are going to have a chance to escape the Jim Crow South and head to the North, where there are better jobs and better opportunities, and still discrimination in the North. But in the North, it's like personal discrimination. There's some systemic discrimination as well, but it's mostly individual discrimination. In the South, it's completely systemic. Jim Crow South, the system is in fact set up to keep African Americans down, and so World War One is going to allow many African Americans to escape that through the Great Migration. And the things that they do are going to build the industrial economy that is going to propel us into the strongest economy in the world. And so, it really truly does affect everybody. Grandpa's working. African Americans are moving out of the South and sharecropping to working in factories. Women are going to, have to take control of the household in ways that they have never done before by paying bills and fixing the toilet and, going to the bank and getting loans, all things they were told that they're not capable of doing. Some of them are going to be working in factories, not as many as World War II, but they are going to pick up clerical jobs. They're going to, start food drives, be in charge of rationing, all of these kind of things that, scrap metal drives, all these kind of things that they were told they weren't supposed to do, right? They were supposed to just stay at home and not get involved in politics or society or anything like that. That's the cult of domesticity. And women are going to start to move away from that. People were urged to not just get jobs but conserve electricity. We are now to meet the production needs of the war. We have to run factories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the electric grid just can't handle that. So people were asked to turn the lights off at night to make sure the factories can run all night. Conserve electricity. They're going to be asked to conserve food and reduce food consumption. They really want people to be as self-sufficient when it comes to food as possible. So all the food from the big farms can be sent overseas to feed the soldiers and Europeans. And so we're going to have things like meatless Mondays, wheatless Tuesdays. We're going to have victory gardens, which are just gardens. So, you're producing your own food and not buying food. So that food can be sent overseas. So, all of these things, people will make daily sacrifices here to be able to try and win this war effort. It's so many sacrifices. Women are going to change the way they dress. Things like nylons that women had just always believed, like you have to cover your legs. Your legs can't be exposed. And we're going to need that material more. That's more World War II. But the concepts are the same. Whether it's nylons or material for skirts. Skirts will get shorter because of World War I and World War II, because we need that material for for war production. And so massive amounts of sacrifices are going to be asked, are going to be asked of. We will start to see propaganda campaigns like the one above me here about what the role that women are supposed to find themselves in, right? Sow the seeds of victory, plant and raise your own vegetables. That way the mass produced stuff can be sent to the soldiers. You can see how that's playing up on like, look, women have always traditionally, I should say, have been in charge of making sure the family gets fed, doing the grocery shopping and the cooking. And so, look, plant a garden, produce your own food. You see the woman here wrapped in the American flag dress, indicating that to be a good American, you need to plant your own garden. So, we can conserve food, and that women will do that. It's not just for women. You can see grandma and grandpa here. Our food is fighting. It's a war of attrition. The first side to run out of food loses, so we need to conserve as much as possible. Plant a victory garden. A garden will make your rations go further. They're actually going to ration food. So, if you're a family of four, you're going to get a certain number of stamps that's going to allow you to buy a certain amount of meat. So if you go to like a grocery store, you don't just pay money for your food. You have to prove that you're allowed to buy it by handing over one of those stamps. So if you don't like the amount of food that the rationing coupons give you, you can supplement that with your victory garden. And you can see grandma and grandpa here with the little kid doing their part to make sure their mass produced food is fighting with the soldiers. Dig on for victory. Same kind of concept here. It's not just women that should be doing this. It's men that are older than fighting age need to be doing it as well. You can see food will win the war. This is actually going to be targeting immigrants. Food will win the war. You came here seeking freedom. You must now help to preserve it. Wheat is needed for the Allies. Waste nothing. So they're essentially saying, look, America is a nation of immigrants. You guys came here for freedom, but freedom is never free. There's always a price that you have to pay for that. And so it's saying, you're welcomed here. You've been able to come to the United States, which isn't perfect, but it's the strongest economy in the world with the most social mobility. You can come here and lift yourself out of poverty and into the middle class, and for a few even become rich. So, you came here for that opportunity, and now you owe the country this sacrifice of wheat. You see the Statue of Liberty in the background, and your stereotypical immigrants on the poster, and mostly European immigrants. So you also have posters like this one right here. I'll move the thing right here. So when you're looking right there, this camera thing always messes me up right there. You are lucky. The war bread. So this is like essentially this poster saying, hey, stop complaining about food rationing because it's wrecking our unity. Your food rationing isn't that bad. It says you are lucky. The war bread you get would seem like cake to the children of Europe. Essentially saying, yeah, as bad as we have it here, and we are having to make sacrifices, Europe has it way worse. Children are starving. They're mixing in sawdust into the wheat and yeast for the bread to kind of fill it out. That's how desperate they are in Europe. So before you complain about how bad we have it here, recognize that it's better here than what it is in Europe. So don't complain. The workplace is going to be changing because of World War I. We're going to see the Selective Service Act is calling, around 3 million to 2.8 million to go fight. There's about 4.8 million soldiers that are going to leave in total. And all of those soldiers had jobs. right? Those jobs for society function have to be filled. So those people are going, and that is, it's not all white men, but it is the majority white men. So the vast majority of the people that are fighting are white men. So the jobs that they're abandoning are the best in the country, right? Most African Americans are still trapped in the South in their system of sharecropping, which has kept them so poor that they can't even afford to travel to the North to get a better job. So when the white men leave to go fight, there's very important jobs that need to be filled, and there's only really two groups of people that can fill those jobs. There's more than two. Old men will fill those jobs, but women and African Americans are going to be expected to take over those jobs. That's going to do two things. One, it's going to, for the women, it's going to allow them to make a little bit of extra money, but it's going to change the way they think. They've been told their whole lives that women are not capable of doing a man's work. That there's a belief out there even that if you do a man's work, that it might turn you into a lesbian, which today we recognize as ridiculous, but literally some women believed that back then, and so they thought they were capable of doing that work. But when their country calls them to action, they're going to say, and it's not that the country calls them to action and says, you can do it. They're like, well, you probably can't do it as good as man, but we need somebody, so you'll have to do. Well, the women will take those jobs and they're going to excel at them. And it's going to blow the stereotype away that women can't do it. Now, most women, when the war is over, are going to give those jobs back to men because they want to, start families, and they still believe in the basic idea that it's their job to raise families. But they're going to have the experience of having done a man's job and been capable of it. And so you're not going to be able to actually tell these women that they can't do those things anymore. And they're going to raise an entire generation of daughters who are going to grow up on the story of of how their mom had lived without their dad and paid the bills and took care of the broken toilet and, had a job and made their own money. And so those young women that are raised hearing those stories will end up doing the same thing in World War II. And then, the women's liberation movement just goes gangbusters after that, because it's undeniable that the concepts of the cult of domesticity and that a woman is only capable of being in the home are just that's just blown to smithereens. The other group, African Americans, factories are going to be desperate for work and for workers, and many of these factories are going to actually head down south and agree to pay African American men to move to the north, pay the expenses like the train ticket to come up north to fill these factory jobs. This is going to be the thing that allows many African American men to escape what has become essentially economic slavery of sharecropping in the South. They've been kept so far in debt to landowners in the South that they're not able to accumulate any wealth, and and they're so poor and so in debt that they can't even leave the South to travel to the north, because that's expensive to be able to get a job. So millions of African American men are going to head north. A lot of them are going to be paid by companies, and they're going to get much better paying jobs in the north. Now, they're still not going to get paid the same as their white counterparts. So we have, this isn't perfect for African American men, but it's the beginning. And those first few that go, the first trickle that go, they get paid to get the train tickets paid for. They're going to save up their money, send it back down to the South, so their brothers and sisters and cousins and moms and dads can afford to move up north to get factory jobs too. And again, this isn't like these jobs aren't like, hey, finally we're gonna trust that African Americans can do the same work as white men. These factory owners, most of them, not all of them, but most of them, don't believe that. They just need anybody to fill these jobs, and they don't expect that these African American men are going to be able to do the same work as white men with the same quality. But when these African American men move north, we're going to find out that they do. As a matter of fact, the women in these African American men are going to preside over the most productive time period in American history up until this point. World War II will be more productive, but again, it'll be women and minorities that are doing that. So the fact that these white men are going off to fight the war, and there will be black men that go fight the war too, but vast majority are white. We're going to provide opportunities for women. So women and African Americans. And so they're going to be, I say, welcomed into the workforce. It's not exactly a smooth transition, and it isn't because people are advocating for racial equality or gender equality. That's not what it is, although some people are arguing for that. It's desperation, and the workers are going to get an opportunity because of that desperation, and they're going to prove their worth. And there's no doubt about it that they're going to do a tremendous job here. Our production is what's going to win the war. So kudos. No, like I said, women get involved. They're going to fill millions of jobs left by soldiers. I mean, women in the workforce is going to be more prevalent during World War II. There'll be more factory jobs during World War II, but women during this time period are going to be out of the home and working more than ever before. They're going to get welcomed into a bunch of professions, nursing, transport, linguistics, phone operators. That's going to be the majority of the jobs. There will be some factory work, but most of that will happen during World War II. But either way, it's going to be vital for the war effort. And it is now involving the average woman. The suffrage movement up until now has been primarily educated elites, upper class, women that have been involved in it. Now it's the average woman that is shattering the stereotypes of the cult of domesticity. And it's going to be their sacrifice here that's going to get them the right to vote. It's essentially, if we talked about the reasons for the war in previous lectures, one is to defend democracy. Women at the end of World War I are going to essentially go to Woodrow Wilson and to politicians all across the country and say, look, you said we needed to make sacrifice to win this war. You said we needed to win this war because it was about defending democracy. But we're not a fully democratic nation when half of the citizens in America can't vote, i.e. women. And so we made sacrifices. We did our part, and you couldn't have won the war without us. And now you need to make good the promise of democracy here in America. And Wilson and many other politicians all across the country looked around and were like, yeah, that makes sense. And that's part of the reason why women will get the right to vote shortly after World War I, 19th Amendment, 1920. So now, most of these women were expected to give up their jobs after the war, when the men came back, and most of them will willingly. They feel like they did their part, and now that the men are back, most women are willing to give up their jobs. Not all of them, but most of them will, and they want to get started. They're typically young women that are doing this. They want to get married, they want to raise a family, they want to do these other things. Some women are going to be forced to give up their jobs that don't want to, but the average American woman does want to give up her job after World War I, because she's got other plans. So African Americans, we're going to see similar thing. There's more work opportunities up in the north to fill industrial needs. African Americans are going to be getting skilled jobs in the north, which is super important because we've talked about this in previous lectures. Skilled labor always gets paid more than unskilled labor because unskilled labor, anybody can do it. So they can, if you're not willing to work for pennies, somebody else will be. And I can hire anybody to do unskilled work. Skilled labor, on the other hand, because it takes time to learn those skills, you're not easily fireable and you're not easily replaceable, which means the worker can demand more money. And so African Americans are going to be able to get these skilled positions, which are going to pay them more. So the standard of living for African Americans is just going to skyrocket after after World War I. Now, it won't be equal to their white counterparts yet. But, all the way up until right before the Great Society in the 1950s, the gap is going to be closing, the wealth gap between whites and African Americans. Now, unfortunately, after like the 1950s, we're going to see that wealth gap increase again. And we'll talk about that in future lectures. But this is a huge step forward for African Americans, and it's not just jobs. They're moving to the North, where you don't have literacy tests to vote, you don't have poll taxes to vote, so you can exercise your political rights easier. Although there will be, it's not a perfect system in North. There's still discrimination in the workplace and in politics, but it's much, much, much less. You're going to see better schools in the North for African American children, better access to health care, just less segregation in general. Although there is still segregation in the North. There's, whites only beaches in Chicago. There's unofficial segregation in redlining, and where banks will give loans to African Americans for which neighborhoods they can live in, which will slowly dissipate over time. So it's not perfect system in the North, but there's no doubt about it. Moving from the South to the North is going to be absolutely critical to African Americans and their success. And it means that this is going to be, it's really World War I and beyond is the first time that the average African American has the opportunity to save a little bit of money. And you don't understand how important that is unless you take a really look at the long term outlook for a people. And so when you're looking at long term, how important it is that grandma and grandpa were able to save a little bit of money or buy a house. Even if they can't save money, if they buy a house, when they die, they pass on that house or that little bit of money to their kids, which means that they have a little bit of a head start. Because of sharecropping in the South, African Americans have been passing on debt, essentially. Passing on debt is illegal, but you're passing on nothing because mom and dad were in debt, which kept generations of African Americans in poverty. Now, as they move up north, they can save a little bit, pass that on, and so the next generation has a little bit of a head start, and so they can work hard and save a little bit more and pass a little bit more on. And that's how minorities have gotten themselves out of poverty in the United States for hundreds of years. It's just African Americans hadn't had that same opportunity because of slavery first and then sharecropping. And so part of the reason why the accumulated wealth of the African American community today is not as much as other minorities in the United States is because of sharecropping and the fact that they were kept in debt for so long. So they haven't been able to accumulate as much wealth over time. So this is the movement north. This is known as the Great Migration. And so it's essentially 500,000. There's different, the Great Migration, 500,000, that number is like the first wave of the Great Migration. The Great Migration really is the exodus of African Americans from the South. And so it's really going to start in World War I and really won't finish until the 1960s. So there's waves. So it's the first wave is about 500,000, and that's during World War I. Now, overall, it will be, over 1 million African Americans that will flee the South. They're getting jobs and they're escaping Jim Crow segregation, literacy tests, poll taxes, segregated bathrooms and hospitals, and all of that awfulness in the South. So the number of African Americans in the North will triple, and it'll be contentious. It's not going to be this absolutely smooth transition. As African American families head north, there are going to be communities. We're going to start to see strife between African American communities and white communities in the North. It's not this perfect transition. Although the North is definitely more tolerant, that doesn't mean everybody is tolerant. And so we'll start to see, as the dynamics shift, we'll start to see some conflict, and it's mostly economic conflict, and we'll talk about why here in the next lecture. So as African Americans head out of the Deep South, you can see kind of the map of the Great Migration, the first wave of the Great Migration. It's going to be African Americans fleeing out of the South and heading to industrial centers in the North. So, St. Louis and East St. Louis are going to be one of those places. Columbus, Ohio is going to be another one. Chicago, New York, Harlem, right, is going to become, one of the most important centers for African American culture. It's just the Harlem Renaissance is going to be just this wonderful artistic movement that is going to be directly, because of the Great Migration. So that is where we're going to leave off for the lecture today. The next lecture, we're going to kind of talk about some of the race riots that happen as African Americans move out of the South and into the North. And we'll talk about some of the changes in the economy that are the result of total war. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Have a good day, and I'll see you again shortly.